Every spring, our lovely kumquat tree in our backyard would be covered with bands of bright, beautiful orange kumquats, and we would harvest them and be left with many, many kumquats. So today, I decided to make homemade marmalades with kumquats. Now, kumquats are these tiny citrus fruits that taste sweet on the outside and tart inside. So when you bite into them, you get this sharp tanginess and then a sugary sweetness. So let's get going with the marmalade. You'll need to wash your kumquats first, of course, and then you want to cut the kumquats into quarters. And this recipe makes about 2 cups of marmalade, so we'll be using 1 standard 1 pint mason jar. You want to remove the seeds but set them aside somewhere since we'll be using them later. And then you see this white part, that's the membrane, and try to get rid of that as well, but you want to save it. Sometimes it's hard to cut out the membrane, which is the middle white part of the citrus, so I sometimes skip that part, but do your best. If you can't, then just leave the membrane as is. And then for each quarter, you want to slice it into thin strips and then cut the strips in half. But it's up to you. Now you could also slice them into bits, but keep in mind that how you cut them is how your finished marmalade will look. So I do like my marmalade to have thin peels because they look prettier and they're just nicer in taste. However, if you like some texture or you want to bite on the peels, then just leave them into tiny bits. So continue cutting your kumquats. It'll take maybe about half an hour to 45 minutes. Take your time. You'll need a total of 2 cups of sliced kumquats. Now, the reason why we save the membranes and seeds is because they contain pectin in them, and that will help our marmalade turn into marmalade. I remember every year my mom would turn these into kumquat juice, like lemonade, or she would give them away to her friends, and it's always so sad to see them go. So that's why I decided to make kumquat marmalade, and they were beyond deliciousness. Anyways, put the 2 cups of sliced kumquats into a medium-sized pot, and with 2 cups of sliced kumquats, you should end up with about a 1/4 cup of the reserved membranes and seeds. Gather and put them into a cheesecloth so that none of that goes into the marmalade. Clip that to the side of the pot with the kumquats. Add 1 cup of water and let the kumquats soak in the water on the countertop for at least 1 hour. This way we can soften the peels a bit and some of the pectin will come out of the membrane and seeds. After 1 hour or more of soaking, take out the cheesecloth and squeeze it. Some juice will come out and that is good. It's important that some of the pectin get into our marmalade. Now, before we cook the kumquats on the stove top, you want to put a plate into the freezer and you'll see why in a minute. Also fill a large pot with water enough to cover a mason jar, and you want to let it come to a boil on the stove. While the water is starting to heat up, start cooking the kumquats on medium-high heat and add 1 cup of white granulated sugar. Yes, 1 cup. It will give the right amount of sweetness and it will keep the marmalades from easily spoiling. Mix the sugar into the kumquats well, and then from then on you want to stir occasionally. And now we're going to start multitasking. Yes, multitasking. So by around 3 to 4 minutes, the water in the pot should be starting to boil, but still simmering, and that's when you want to drop a towel into the water and a standard size mason jar. Just 1. Let that continue to heat up on high heat until the water comes to a boil. You want the jar to sit in that boiling water for at least 10 minutes. Now back to the kumquats. It should be producing quite a lot of steam by now, so keep on stirring, and you will still start seeing scum around the edges of the surface. You want to discard them, so just use a spoon to go around the edge and scoop out the yellow whitish stuff. They are impurities and they can spoil your marmalade, so be sure to get those out. So now check on the pot of water. If the water is boiling and the jar has been in the boiling water for at least 10 minutes, you can turn off the heat. So basically, you want your mason jar to sit in boiling water for at least 10 minutes. This partially sterilizes and also heats up the jar. And then soon, which will take about 20 minutes, the kumquats will start boiling like crazy, and you really need to keep on stirring. Just give it a quick stir, and then yes, we are going back and forth. Stay with me. Lift the jar from the water and set it out onto a dry towel and flip it upside down so that it can dry out any excess water. Now go back to the kumquats and it should be vigorously boiling at around the 20-minute mark. Stir and then turn off the heat. Take the plate that was in the freezer and spoon a little of the mixture onto the plate. Then use your fingers to slash through the marmalade, and if it leaves a mark, then you are done. If it still feels runny and does not seem to set when placed on the frozen plate, continue cooking the mixture until it gets to that point. The total cooking time for the marmalades will be 20 to 25 minutes. Once your marmalade is done cooking, let it cool on a wire rack for 5 minutes. That way the peels won't settle on the bottom later. In the meantime, take the mason jar's lid and pop that into the water in the pot, which should still be hot. Just let the lid sit in the hot water for 5 minutes, and then take the lid out and leave it on the dry towel. And then the last step, finally, is to ladle the marmalade into a measuring cup and pour that into the mason jar. The reason why we boiled the mason jar in the water was because if you pour hot jam into a cold jar, the jar will likely break. So just to be safe, and plus, boiling the jar will also sterilize the jar, which means your jar will be clean for better storage. And speaking of storage, you can keep the marmalades for up to 3 weeks. I'll also leave a brief summary of the process in the description so you can check that out. You don't want to fill your marmalades up to the top, leave about 1 inch of space. Lastly, wipe the rim of the jar with a clean paper towel and put the lid on and secure the jar with the ring. And that is it. There is the kumquat marmalade, super delish. I paired it with some whole wheat bread I made on the same day, and I was going to make a video on it, but the bread didn't turn out so good. So anyways, I really hope you enjoyed this recipe and video. I'm sorry if you got a bit dizzy going back and forth. So yeah, when you open the lid, you should hear a pop sound, which means your jar was properly sealed. Oh yes, and for the taste, it was so good. It was tangy, yet it has the perfect amount of sweetness. I got some of the kumquats in my marmalade as well. This kumquat marmalade is really good and totally worth the effort, so if you've got some kumquats, give this a try.